Good to see you, Bob.
Hey, Leo, it was a pleasure.
All right. So 50 years in boxing promotion, right? This your 50th anniversary?
50 was March 29th, 1966 was my first fight. And so that was my 50th anniversary, Ali and Chuvalo. And it was a big, big celebration in the city of Toronto commemorating that event.
We're going to show some of the fighters here that you promoted over the years from this video that showed, man, just all of these different legends. And you said earlier that you owe your career to Muhammad Ali. Explain.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I knew nothing about boxing when Jim Brown, the great football player, introduced me to Ali after telling me that I should be Ali's promoter. And I signed on with Ali. We were going to do this fight in Chicago against Ali against Ernie Terrell. And Ali is training in Florida. And that's when his draft classification changed from 1Y, not eligible, to service, because at that point Ali had trouble reading and writing, and they made him 1A. And a newscaster for one of the television stations got to him, and that's when he said that he got nothing against the Viet Cong. They never used the N-word about him, and he wasn't going to serve. And everything hit the fan. Mayor Daley, the original Mayor Daley, Richard Daley, mayor of Chicago, not his son, the original one, he got the Illinois Commission to throw us out of Chicago. Cities around the country were putting out statements, we won't allow the fight here. Nobody asked them, but it turned out that there was no place in the United States that we could do the fight. I went to Montreal and put it in the Forum in Montreal, and the American Legion put pressure on the mayor, Mayor Drapeau, who was doing a World's Fair the year later, that they would boycott the World's Fair. And so we got kicked out of Montreal. And Harold Ballard, who was a co-owner of the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Maple Leaf Gardens, said, you come to Toronto, I'm going to do the fight here. I got to Toronto, and his partner, Connie Smythe, you heard of the Smythe division? Smythe said, I don't want this draft dodger in the building. So Ballard had to go to the bank. This is true. And he got enough funds to buy out Smythe from the team and from the arena.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. And then Ernie Terrell pulls out of the fight because in those days, fighters got paid on percentages, and money was dwindling with all this thing happening. And 20 days before the fight was to be scheduled, we got George Chuvalo, who had lost a close decision to Ernie Terrell, who was from Toronto, to accept the fight.
Okay.
And we finally got it off. And Jim Brown had told me, and he just repeated it to a media outlet in Toronto, that if that fight hadn't come off, it would have been a real bad blow to the civil rights movement.
Right.
Because it would have meant that if somebody, black athlete, had shot his mouth off, the establishment could rise up and shut him down. And the fact that we were able to do the fight and put it to bed really was, I think, in retrospect, a great blow in favor of the civil rights movement.
And let's really put that in perspective, because when we talked earlier, you said 90% of the people at that time in this country opposed Ali on the basis of his objection.
Saying 90 is conservative. I mean, it probably was a lot higher. Nobody up to that point ever condemned or criticized the United States for going into a war.
You won't fight for your country. You refuse to go into the...
I'm a minister of my religion. This country has laws for ministers.
Mr. Muhammad Ali has just refused to be inducted into the United States Armed Forces.
It took an all-white jury less than a half hour to find Muhammad Ali guilty of all charges and specifications.
I find nothing interesting or tolerable about this man. He's a disgrace to his country, his race, and what he laughingly describes as his profession.
I'm not allowed to work here now in America. I'm
not allowed to leave America.
Remember, we came out of the Second World War, rah-rah, very patriotic, did a great job, went right into the Korean War, which everybody accepted, no problem. We stopped the Chinese, in effect, and their allies, the North Korean, from invading and taking over South Korea. And so when we went into Vietnam, nobody that I knew, there had to be some people, opposed it. Years later.
Except the hippies, right?
Well, there weren't hippies opposing it.
Okay.
Then. Nobody did. That came later.
Okay.
That came as we moved towards 1968. If we moved 2 years later, and then 3 years later, and 4 years later, a whole movement grew up against the war.
And spurred by the assassination of Dr. King and a lot of other things that happened in the context.
Absolutely right. But Lee, the thing that was important, you got to understand this country in the early 60s. This country in the early 60s was a horrible place for African Americans. In vast regions of the country, they couldn't go to sit at a lunchroom, they couldn't use a restroom, hotels were segregated.
My father was one of those people.
It's hard to believe. Yeah, well, your father, so you know it from family history. But it's hard for most people to realize how bad it was. And then as far as black athletes were concerned, they were counseled by the leaders, don't say anything. Things are improving. They'll improve slowly. Don't make waves, right? And Jackie Robinson listened, and Joe Louis listened. And it wasn't until Muhammad Ali, having went to school with Malcolm X and learned a lot of things from Malcolm X and was very loquacious as a guy who advanced his boxing career the way he did, which he learned from Gorgeous George. So he learned he could speak and connect with the people. Now he took that talent that he had and he applied it to rights for black people. Black is pretty, black isn't ugly, that type of thing.
Black is beautiful, right?
Black is beautiful, right. And Ali said things that shocked people. And then when he wouldn't go into the service, that was the last straw. So Ali had the vengeance of everybody, of the white establishment, against him.